remarkable woman. So, yeah. Secretary Clinton, bienvenue au Canada. On est tellement, tellement content de vous voir. Oui? Est-ce qu'on est contente? On vous admire énormément et c'est un honneur pour nous tous que vous êtes ici avec nous aujourd'hui. You know that we're all correctly very excited that Secretary Clinton is here. Yeah. And I want to start on a little bit of a serious note. And I want to start by reading something that Secretary Clinton said on November 9th, 2016. Oh my God, I'm starting to cry now. I think all of us heard you say this, and I think all of us cried. So this is what you said. And to all the women, especially the young women, who put their faith in this campaign and in me, I want you to know that nothing has made me prouder than to be your champion. Now, I know we still have not shattered that highest and hardest glass ceiling, but someday someone will, and hopefully sooner than we might think right now. Now, Secretary Clinton, what I want to say to you, I just really want to pay tribute to you on behalf of everybody in this room, but maybe especially the women, and maybe especially the young women. I really mean it because, they call you a trailblazer. I call you a trailblazer. And we're Canadian, so we like hiking in the bush. We like cross-country skiing. And the person who is the trail breaker, that's the person who, if you're skiing or you're hiking, they get out in front. They have to break the path through the snow. They have to break the path through the bush. They get all those branches in their face and slapping at you. And, when I go hiking or skiing with my dad, the trail breaker gets the first beer when you get home. But the trail breaker is the person who gets bruised and who gets beaten up, but who makes things so much easier for everyone who follows you.
Well, first let me just say how thrilled I am to be here at the Liberal Party conference, to see such enthusiasm, such excitement, to have had the opportunity to listen backstage and look on the big screen as our longtime friend, your former Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, spoke. And now to be here with the Deputy Prime Minister to talk about whatever's on her mind and whatever is pertinent to the incredible record that the Liberal Party has here in Canada. And so I personally am just delighted to be here because in many ways, the Liberal Party of Canada is a trailbreaker. And the things that over the history of this party you have achieved for Canada have not only improved the lives and opportunities of your fellow Canadians, but have also, sort of set a trail for others to try to follow. So I'm thrilled to be with all of you today.
Well, thank you very much for that. And, you know, a person who is on his way to the coronation right now, but who right now is the guy skiing in front, breaking through the snow, getting beaten up, is our amazing Prime Minister. And we have to remember he's breaking the trail for us, right? And when he gets beaten up, it's for all of us. I know we remember that. One of the things that is remarkable about his leadership is he is a truly feminist prime minister. And that is reflected in his cabinet. But even more importantly, it's reflected in our policies. And one thing, I'm going to brag to you, Secretary Clinton, okay?
Well, it is a political conference.
Right,
so
okay.
That's okay with me.
And we had a conversation yesterday on this stage about how Canadians, like, we think bragging is rude. I know you spend a lot of time in Canada. Louise Penny will tell you, like, we think it's bad. But we have to learn to brag a little bit more. So my brag to you right now is we now have a national system of early learning and childcare. Actually true.
You know, it is not bragging if it's real. And I think it's important in today's political world to get out there and make sure people know what you've done. $10 a day for childcare, that's extraordinary. That's an incredible accomplishment.
We think so. And, like, it is amazing that we've actually done it. You said, not just famously, but transformatively in Beijing, that women's rights are human rights. Shocking that that would be a shocking thing, but it was, and it still is. We say now, feminist policy is economic policy. Because our early learning and childcare, we're going to get to $10 a day by 2025. Right now, we've already cut fees by 50%. And that makes life so much better for working families. It means women don't have to choose between kids and a career anymore. But you know what? It also, I'm the finance minister, the economy, very focused on, loved what Prime Minister Chrétien had to say about fiscal policy, just by the way. Yay, Prime Minister Chrétien. Having early learning and childcare, we now have the highest women's labor force participation rate in Canadian history. For working age women, it is 85%. I'm sorry to say just 77% in the US. So that's the difference feminist economic policy makes. But I want to talk to you about another feminist issue where you were sadly prescient. During the election campaign in 2016, your campaign put out a press release after a Supreme Court decision on abortion rights. And you warned Americans that they should not take abortion rights for granted, that the president appoints Supreme Court justices, and the decision in the election could be a decision on abortion rights. I'm so sorry that you were so smart and that you predicted things. That's terrible. But tell us what the path is now.
Well, you've said a lot of things that I want to respond to, so thank you for that. First of all, I did have to, kind of let out a laugh when I heard Jean talking about surpluses, because he and my husband still get together, and, occasionally they'll have a late night conversation, and honest to goodness, they talk about surpluses. Other things as well, but they're both pretty proud of what they achieved. But I think the idea of a feminist set of policies, a feminist economic policy, is exactly where you need to be if you want to increase economic opportunity and economic output. And what you've done with childcare is a signal that you want to make it possible for half the population, potentially half the workforce, to be engaged, to pursue whatever their dreams and ambitions and interests might be. And, you know, this is not just a nice thing to do. I mean, if you look at economic output, if you look at the GDP of advanced countries, let alone every other country, developing countries and developed, there is absolutely no doubt, no argument any longer that if you recognize the importance of making it possible for women to be both in the formal workforce and taking care of family responsibilities if they have them, you will increase the GDP of your nation. It doesn't matter whether you're Canada or the United States or any other country. And to continue to ignore that, to deny that, to act as though things like paid family leave and quality affordable childcare are luxuries is to hobble your economy as well as hobble women's dreams and aspirations. And you know, there has been an enormous amount of progress around the world on behalf of women's rights and opportunities and their full participation in society in every aspect since the Beijing conference in 1995. Because people, you know, very nicely remember my speech and what I had to say there, but they often don't know or don't recall that there was a platform for action that was unanimously passed. Every nation, I think it was 178 or 80 nations, all signed off on this platform for action. And think about some of the challenges we had back in 1995. In most of the world, domestic violence was considered cultural, not criminal. In most of the world, there were restrictions on women's access to education that were either legal or cultural. Access to health care was by no means as available as it needed to be. There were obstacles for women being in the formal workforce. There were obstacles to voting, to inheriting property. The list goes on. So we have made progress, but we are in much of the world, and I would argue, including in my own country, engaged in a struggle as to whether we fall back or are pushed back or continue to move forward together. And if you take the issue of reproductive choice and you realize that this has been a strategy for a very long time by forces within the United States to reverse Roe v. Wade, you realize that it is restricting women's autonomy, women's choices, and it is endangering women's lives. And that will be one of the big issues in the 2024 presidential election in the United States. So we have to recognize that despite the progress, we are still, sadly, seeing a lot of pushback, and it got worse because of COVID. You know, COVID had so many impacts on our mental and physical health, on our relationships to one another, on how we work, how we, you know, communicate. I mean, it just truly was in many ways a transformative experience that none of us planned for, expected, and now are still living with the consequences. But in many parts of the world, child marriage went back up after it had gone down. Domestic violence went back up. Jobs were lost, particularly among women who had to. We had no choice to be in the workforce when jobs were closed or children were at home. And there was just such a disruption in how life was unfolding, and the consequences are still, as I say, being felt. So we lost some ground. We're trying to slowly pick that back up. But make no mistake about it, in our country, there is a very significant historical struggle going on about whether we move forward or the clock is turned back. And so you'll hear a lot of the political debate and rhetoric coming from across your southern border, where people are going to be, very engaged and passionate about trying to have an election on real issues, not on diversions, not on efforts to flood our political zone with mis and disinformation, but to really try to come to grips with the choices that are before the American people. And I would predict that you're going to have some of that, in the next election, whenever it is for you, because there are, forces in your own country that are trying to figure out whether they can tinker with the clock and maybe turn it back a little.
There sure are, Secretary Clinton. There sure are. Our intention is for the next election to be in 2025, right? And I think we need to really listen carefully to Secretary Clinton's warning. And maybe our southern, really wonderful friends and neighbors in 2016, you did warn them. We see what happened. There's a great saying from Bismarck, only a fool learns from his own mistakes. So let's not do that, guys. And our party, Madam Secretary, we will always stand with a woman's right to choose. We know what that means, always. For sure. And I think, as the Secretary said, let's not take what we have for granted. Let's really, really not. Let's not sit on our hands and let forces of reaction turn back the clock. But I do want to ask you, Secretary, a little bit about those diversions. And you talked about progress since that amazing speech in Beijing. I'm a liberal. I believe in progress. And I think about my own life and my mother's life. So much easier, so much better. But I had a kind of sobering conversation yesterday with my riding association, the people in my community who support me. And the president of the U of T Young Liberals, a wonderful young woman called Avi, was in the group. And she said, when I see, if Avi is here, yay for Avi, yay for the young liberals, all young liberals. You are wonderful. Thank you for being here. But she said something that really horrified me. And I know you're a mother. I know you're a grandmother to an 8-year-old girl. Avi said, when I look at social media, and she said specifically, when I look at the comments made about me, I can't believe people would say mean things about me, but apparently they do, about you and Minister Anand, I just kind of think, why would I want to do that? Why would I go out there and be part of that? Now, I told her that my own reaction is tell them to bad word off. And that is my reaction. Also, I just don't read those things. I find they don't bug me so much that way. But it really worried me that young women would feel that things are getting worse, not better. Do you think that's happening, and what should we do about it?
Well, I certainly think online, the level of vicious commenting and personal attacks is just epidemic. And it has serious consequences because, as young Abby was telling you, young people are living so much of their lives online. I mean, part of the reason you can say, oh, I don't pay any attention to that is because, you're in the...
Are you saying because I'm old? Yes.
No,
it's
I
true.
wasn't saying that.
I'm going to be 55
I was
this
saying,
summer.
I was
My
saying
kids
you're
do
living
call
in
me
the
old.
real world, and that's where you form your relationships, and you came to social media when you were a
As an
more
older
mature
person.
person, yes. But think about if you spend an enormous amount of time staring at a screen and scrolling through social media and searching for clues about how you will be perceived and what you want to do and whether you're being included in your friends group or not. I mean, there is a lot of evidence that there is a connection, a correlation, if not a causation, a correlation between social media and the messages that it conveys and increasing levels of anxiety and depression and eating disorders and even, heaven forbid, suicide, right? Because it's real to young people who have lived in that world. And I have to confess, and I am a lot older than you, I have to confess that I am, the queen of attacks and Exhibit A for what, people say about you.
And you're still standing,
And I'm still
Madam
standing, but part of the reason is because I have learned to take criticism seriously, but not personally.
Okay.
And it's really, really important to try to learn that lesson. Sometimes your critics, even though you hate it, sometimes your critics will teach you things or tell you things your friends won't. And you have to have enough willingness to be able to say, oh, well, maybe I didn't do that as well as I should, or maybe I ought to try something different. That's how you should take criticism. But if you are living in the online world and all you get is criticism or potential criticism, you begin to take it personally, and you are going to be impacted by taking it personally. So part of what we have to do is equip our young people better to deal with that, because it's there, it's not going away. But secondly, we have to do a better job of protecting young people, and really anybody online, but particularly young people, from the most virulent, vicious kinds of attacks. If you follow some of the studies that have been done about people who get attacked online, it's predominantly women who put themselves into the public arena, whether it's politics or entertainment or business or journalism. There is just an overreaction and an effort to try to drag that person down. So you have to be personally equipped, but you also have to look for ways, I think, to try to rein in some of the excesses, because the misogyny and the sexism online is really bad, and it's only going to get worse. And I'll tell you a quick story. So we're now moving into artificial intelligence writ large. We're moving into deep fakes online. Well, a few years ago, I think it was 2018, Nancy Pelosi, the great political leader in our country, somebody created a deep fake, and they took words. So took words out of this speech over here, that conversation over there, put it together in order to make her look drunk, and posted it. Now, number one, she doesn't drink, so that was a problem, but never let the truth stand in the way of a good fake. And it just went viral. And, her office and her friends and allies like me were we were upset for her, but we were also very worried at what this portended. So several of us, we contacted the online platforms. YouTube took it down. Twitter took it down. Facebook said, no, we're not taking it down because we think our customers can tell the difference. They get to make up their own mind. Now, that was with a relatively primitive fake. You will be running in 2025, and you will face more online fakes, fake videos of you, fake videos of the Prime Minister, fake videos of other leaders of the Liberal Party. This is coming. So get ready and try to prevent as much as you can, but also protect against it.
Okay, I think that is really, really good advice. We will do that. I love your taking criticism seriously, but not personally. That is really wise. There are a lot of people who are fans here of Kathleen Wynne. And and she's former Premier of Ontario, and she said to me early on, you need to have a thick skin, but not too thick. You need to let some of that criticism penetrate. I wonder whether women think that a little more than men. Just saying. Just saying. But it is very wise advice, incredibly
Well,
wise.
but look, I think that one of the, traits we have been acquiring and need to acquire is, the ability to blow through criticism and not let it bother you and not be brought down by it and keep smiling and keep moving on. The Liberal Party in Canada is an optimistic, progressive, forward-looking party, right? And so part of the opposition's approach, it seems to me, is to try to bring down that level of optimism and positivity and confidence. And it's something you have to keep in mind. So, yeah, I do think women, because we're still relatively new to the political arena, obviously we've been there a while, but nowhere near as long as men. There are techniques, there are tactics, there are strategies that you have to acquire and use, and that's one of them. You just keep going in the face of whatever the criticism and the attacks might be.
I think we can learn a lot from you on how to do that. Okay, I want to change gear a little bit and talk about another issue that I know Secretary Clinton has worked on so much and knows so much about, and we all care about a lot. And this is the illegal and barbaric Russian invasion of Ukraine. You just yesterday at the 92nd Street Y had a really great conversation with President Clinton, David Rubenstein, and you said that we can't trust Putin. You, a long time ago, said he's a former KGB agent, he has no soul, and you said we have to, and you said we have to support Ukraine to ensure that Ukraine wins and has a strong position at the bargaining table. What does it, And I spoke to the Ukrainian Prime Minister this morning, Denis Shmyhal, and I mentioned that we would be talking tonight. He said, please thank Hillary and tell her how grateful we are for all of her support. So it is really recognized. What does it mean supporting Ukraine? What should we be doing right now?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that Ukraine's fight for freedom and against Russian aggression is our fight. It is not just their fight. And the reason the reason I say that is because we're dealing with a leader and a system that has been trying to restore the Russian empire that was preceded the Soviet Union, but which, the collapse of the Soviet Union led Putin to say it was like the greatest catastrophe in human history. This is a long-term mission for Vladimir Putin. And part of what we saw happen was him invading Georgia, seizing 2 provinces, 2 states within Georgia. You know, we all sanctioned him. We gave speeches about it. We, you know, expressed our absolute opposition, but nobody really did much. Think of the lesson Putin took from that. Okay, probe, probe, probe. He kind of really follows that old Leninist line about, you know, probe with the scalpel till you hit bone. He hadn't hit bone. Nobody was causing much of a fuss. That was 2008. Then, 2014, he invades Ukraine for the first time. And again, it was, oh my gosh, we wish he wouldn't do that. It's really unfortunate. But we've got other things we have to focus on and other places that we have to pay attention to. So the message that he got was, okay, I can go that far. I can actually invade places and get away with it. And I can also interfere with elections. I can suborn politicians. I can buy my way into influencing media and pretending that I'm not, because I want to undermine democracy. And you just have to accept that is, in his mind, the great challenge to his mission of restoring Russian greatness. You know, when I was Secretary of State, there was this moment where Putin had decided, for his own reasons, that he wasn't going to be president anymore. He was going to be prime minister, and Medvedev was going to be president. And we got a lot done with Medvedev during that interim period. And one of the things we tried to really persuade, and I say we meaning President Obama and I, was that, you know, Russia didn't have to be as dependent upon a natural resource economy. They could develop a technology economy. Think of all the Russian expats living in Canada, the United States, Europe, who are starting businesses, who are so successful. And Medvedev seemed quite interested in that. And he actually, we sent him out to Silicon Valley. We, you know, gave him an opportunity to think hard about what they could do maybe in Russia to really create that kind of entrepreneurial environment. And Putin said no. Because if you're going to encourage people to be free-thinking in business, whoa, that's a threat to the state eventually. And the reason he got so crosswise with me and spent a lot of time and effort working to defeat me is because, you know, I said that, number one, they could have had a different future, but number two, when he decided to go back to be president, they ran these very crooked elections, and thousands of Russians poured into the street to protest. And Putin blamed me. He couldn't come to grips with the fact that the Russian people felt like maybe there was this moment, maybe they would be able to chart a different future. No, he blamed me for the protests in the Russian streets. So that's just a little background for who we're dealing with. And the
do you think he had a personal animosity directly against you? Did he see you as a particular threat to him?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, he's on record saying that, but we also have intercepted intelligence where the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, a top official, a general, is giving orders to the people who are, you know, spreading misinformation about me. And basically we have an intercept which says, here are your orders, you know, don't say anything unfavorable about Trump or Sanders. We support them, but do anything you can to hurt Hillary Clinton. So yeah, I mean, we understood that. You know, in a perverse way, it is sort of flattering, obviously.
It is.
But
perverse, but a mark of honor.
Yeah, but I tell those stories because I want you to understand you're dealing with someone who is not only narcissistic and megalomaniacal, but totally untrustworthy. And because he thinks he is, as I say, on this mission to restore Russian greatness as he defines it. But what that means is he's committing war crimes. He is now been charged by the International Court with a form of genocide, which is the kidnapping of Ukrainian children and sending them to Russia to destroy populations. So it is in our interest to stop them. And when I sometimes hear commentators, basically saying things like, well, you've got to understand his position. I say, go talk to a Pole or an Estonian or a Lithuanian or a Latvian or a Finn or a Swede. They know what his real objective is, and they know we've got to stop him.
Canada agrees. The Liberal Party agrees. Do you want to give us some thoughts on what specifically we need to do to stop him?
Well, we have to continue to provide as much military support to Ukraine. I mean, they're doing the fighting. They're fighting and dying. They are the ones who are literally on the front lines to save their country and to create a bulwark for democracy. And I wish we would do even more. I wish we would speed up the delivery of everything that they need. I wish all of our countries, yours, mine, everybody in the alliance, dig deep, send them anything we can send them, because if they are going to start a spring offensive once the ground is dry enough, they're going to need it, because what you've seen with this Russian invasion is an absolute disregard by the Russian leadership, both Putin and the military leaders, total disregard for the lives of their own people. They have lost, by the last estimate, maybe 100,000, which is just an astonishing figure. And they have, emptied prisons to send people to go fight with the mercenaries, the Wagner's army. But they do have a lot of ammunitions, and they have a lot of long-range missiles, and they still control a lot of the airspace. And, we need to do everything even more quickly to help them. The only way that I see there could be some potential stopping point in the war, and it's really up to the Ukrainians. None of us should be telling them what they should do in order to protect their sovereignty and their people. But if the Ukrainians were successful in pushing the Russians out of the territory they have seized since last February, then there might be an opportunity for some kind of leverage by the Ukrainians at a negotiating table. But it's going to require the Ukrainians deciding they've gone as far as they think they have gone, not us substituting our judgment for them. And the best way to end Putin's aggression is for Ukraine to win. And that means we have to give them more help.
And how about China, Madam Secretary? Now, I have heard some people make the argument, maybe particularly some Republicans, that supporting, we shouldn't be paying too much attention to Ukraine, we shouldn't be devoting too many resources there, because the focus needs to be on China. I've heard you make a different argument about the connection between our support for Ukraine. So what does a Ukrainian victory mean for China, for geopolitics?
It would be disastrous if Ukraine does not win in terms of unleashing Chinese aggression, right? So let me just back up a second. I think part of the reason Putin invaded when he did was because he believed, and had reason to believe, that if the former guy, whose name shall go unmentioned, had been re-elected president, he was going to pull the United States out of NATO. Then it would have been a cakewalk, right? So once it was clear, despite some people's attempt to deny the reality of our election, once it was clear that Joe Biden had won, Putin felt there was no reason to wait. And he was also testing the transatlantic alliance. He was testing particularly the Europeans and the American and Canadian resolve as to whether or not we would do anything to support Ukraine. Now, I believed that there was a real possibility that within the next 3 years, Xi Jinping, who had decided he was going to be leader for life and was publicly saying he didn't want to pass on the problem of Taiwan to someone else, that meant that they were going to move against Taiwan in a relatively, short period of time. The invasion of Ukraine's failure, because Putin thought he could capture Ukraine and install a puppet regime literally within a week, and they had puppets waiting in the wings, sent a very strong message to China that, whoa, wait a minute, this is not working out the way we thought it would, because you remember Putin went to see Xi before he launched the invasion.
Friendship without limits.
Yes, that's right. Friendship without limits. So all of a sudden you saw China being much more cautious. They have not provided as much support as I think Putin expected or has asked for, because they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we play this? Because look at what happened. It wasn't just that the Ukrainians on their own repelled the initial Russian invasion. It was that fairly quickly in political years, we began supplying military equipment and support, and we began imposing sanctions. Now, the sanctions on Russia, are focused on what Russia has to export, which is largely its, fossil fuel production. China has a huge export, business with the entire world. A lot of consumer goods as well as hard goods and everything else. So think of you're sitting in Beijing and the world largely comes together behind sanctions on Russia over energy, which is really, really hard to sanction because it has such consequences for people's lives and for industrial production. But the world does it. And the Europeans, who nobody thought would be able to endure the kind of cutbacks that they had to face, they kept going and they didn't give up. So you're sitting in a meeting in Beijing and you're looking at the whole range of stuff that could be sanctioned if you go into Taiwan. And all of a sudden you're going, whoa, we got to think this through. We can't be quite as sure that we will do this and nobody will respond. So I think the calculus that the Chinese leadership, largely Xi, are going through now is they are still intent upon doing to Taiwan what they did to Hong Kong. Remember, they broke their agreement with Taiwan, right? With Hong Kong. They signed an agreement that, it would be allowed to continue with its democratic
One country, two
government.
systems.
Yeah, that's right. One country, two systems. They would be a free market. They'd have all kinds of trading and contractual legal protections that are not available in China, and they would have a democratic governance. And they just blew through it and decided, we're tired of that. We're taking over Hong Kong. So there should be no doubt that that's what they intend to do to Taiwan. So the challenge is, how do we increase the deterrence and send the messages that either slow them down or make them rethink? And to that end, I really believe that you've seen some positive developments. So there's a very positive development with the Philippines, once again opening military bases to U.S. Forces. The Japanese are building up a defense budget, something that they have not done since World War II, in part because they have ongoing territorial disputes with Russia, and they have lots of historic issues, obviously, between them and China. South Korea, the South Korean president was just in Washington. Australia now is going to get nuclear submarines. The relationship between Japan, Australia, India, the United States to try to begin to figure out how strategically to prevent China from continuing to be aggressive in the Pacific. All of that is happening. So people are paying attention to that, and we're trying to do a better job sending a message of deterrence to China.
Now, I agree with you, Madam Secretary, that the single strongest message of deterrence we can send to China is a decisive Ukrainian victory. That is something, that is the message that says to all the world's dictators, you know what? Democracy is prepared to fight back, and democracy can actually win. And I do have to do a little small Canadian brag on the sanctions front. Canada was the first G7 country, I think the first country in the world to withdraw most favored nation trading status from Russia. We were the first country to ban the import of Russian oil and gas. So we are there at the cutting edge, as we should be. But this fight between democracy and dictatorship, obviously it is the bloodiest and the most lethal in the trenches of Bakhmut. But I think it's happening in our society and in yours. How worried are you about that? And what should we be doing to defend our democracies at home?
I think you're absolutely right. And it is quite surprising, even shocking to me, that we have elected leaders in the United States who seem enamored of authoritarianism and authoritarian leaders. We had a former president who expressed his admiration for Putin, for Orban in Hungary, and others. And we have people in our press and in public life who are very attracted to the idea that, democracy is so messy. I mean, you got to deal with people you don't agree with and you don't even like, and you have to compromise, and it takes so much time. I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Let's have leaders who will make the decisions for us, tell us what to do, and then we don't have to worry about it. There is a sad, unfortunate development in a lot of our democracies that there's an attraction by forces largely on the right now that are undermining democracy because of their disregard for institutions, their dismissal of a free press, their denial of minority rights, all of that which is happening in my own country and elsewhere. So I think you just have to be highly alert to this. Do not dismiss it as the kind of musing of cranks or the very small groups that rant online or have radio stations that pump up a bunch of nonsense. There is something right now going on in our world, in democratic countries, that is undermining our trust in one another, our foundational understanding of what it takes to run a democracy with all of its flaws. There is no better system, and we should be proud to be part of democracies that make tough decisions. And there is a real sense of, as Joe Biden says all the time, we are in a struggle between democracy and autocracy. And honestly, it comes down to the attraction that strong men, and they're always men, have for certain people for psychological, political, ideological, religious, financial reasons, that they want to line up behind the guy who basically says, I know all the answers, I can solve anything, you just listen to me and don't say anything that I don't agree with. Squash opposition, squash a free press, just give me free rein, you won't have to worry about politics ever again. So there is a mood in our country and elsewhere that's happening. And then there are all these cultural issues that are used to really keep people agitated and off balance, that are used to divert people's attention from the hard issues like, how are we going to defeat Russia in Ukraine? How are we going to deal with, in our case, a looming debt limit crisis? Let's go talk about some cultural issue that can keep people all wrought up.
So I think we really need to listen very carefully to the warning Secretary Clinton has just given us. And it is all too easy to dismiss some of these ideas as outlandish, and not to take them seriously because they're so far out of the mainstream discourse, out of what we believe. So let me just say, for Canadians and liberals here, when someone says, I want to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada, let's take that seriously. Let's understand what is being said. When someone says, I want to abolish the CBC, et aussi Radio-Canada, qui est tellement important pour tout notre pays, on doit se prendre au sérieux. On doit comprendre que les gens qui disent ça, c'est vraiment leur objectif et ils veulent vraiment, vraiment changer sérieusement notre société. And when someone puts incel tags on their social media, we have to take that seriously. We can't just drive by and not pay attention. It could happen here. But we're not going to let it happen, right? That's why we're all here.
I just want to underscore her warning. I was in the Senate for 8 years. I served with a lot of the people who are still there. I don't recognize them. I don't recognize people who I worked with who are now willing to engage in election denial, who are claiming that there are outlandish conspiracies, that the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th didn't really happen, even though we saw it with our own eyes. It is shocking to me what has happened to the Republican Party in the United States. They have largely acceded to the most outlandish, untrue kinds of claims. And I never thought that would happen. If you had asked me even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, would so-and-so or so-and-so be supporting a former president who wants to destroy our country's institutions for his own purposes, political and financial, I would not have believed it. So I don't want to be an alarmist, but I think a lot, in the Democratic Party in the United States, I'll speak for us, not for you in the Liberal Party, I think we pride ourselves on being tolerant, and thank goodness we are, but sometimes there are things you should not tolerate.
Okay, we heard it from the woman who knows, so let's remember that. And we also heard, I think, a good political strategy, a good Canadian political strategy from Prime Minister Chrétien. I loved his idea of a really big tent now inviting Stephen Harper to come join the Liberal Party. And that might be a stretch a little too far. But I really think now is the moment to have conversations with our conservative friends, with our conservative neighbors, you guys know I'm from Northern Alberta, so I have conservative relatives, quite a few, and really to say to them, here is our vision of Canada. And we think this vision, our Liberal vision, includes you a lot more than what the other guys are saying. Don't you agree? And I think we're going to find, maybe we're not going to go all the way to Stephen Harper, although I think, François Philippe, we should ask Jean Chrétien to make the call and make the ask. We always believe in making that last call, but I think we're going to win over a lot of people. Now, our time is running out, and I just need to ask a question moving into the personal space for female politicians, and I need some advice. And I'm going to start by promoting the really hilarious and wonderful and page-turning book Secretary Clinton has written with our very own wonderful Canadian Louise Penny. State of Terror. Now, I love this book, and not only because in the first chapter there is a Canadian foreign minister who is not very well dressed. Some of us are not very well dressed that often, wearing a moose and bear pajamas on the Zoom call. I loved that. But what really grabbed me in the opening scene is our heroine, Secretary of State Ellen Adams. She's just been on a trip. Okay, she has her own plane. Canadian politicians don't do this. But she's just been on it. Okay, but still, it's been a long trip. She's been in Korea. She's been in the DMZ. She's like her suit is all muddy. Her hair is a mess. And there's like this command performance with the president, State of the Union. And there's this big debate in her team. Like, should she change and stuff, or does she just show up? Our wonderful heroine shows up. And she gets excoriated. But like, my question to you, Secretary Clinton, is, okay, I'm going to make an admission. You can tell me if you agree. I love my job. I am so grateful to all of you for letting me do my job and serve you. I truly love it. I really do. It is a privilege. But there are two things I hate: worrying about my hair and worrying about my clothes. The worst thing, it's terrible. I'm very bad at it. And if even once my hair is a mess in a picture, that's gonna be the picture in the newspaper and on TV, like for years, the worst picture. Is this true, and what do we do about it?
Well, you know it's true. It is absolutely true. In my book, What Happened, I have a chapter on being a woman in politics, and I calculated from the time I began my presidential campaign to the election day, how much time I spent on hair and makeup. And think about this, 25 days. Think about it. And then I thought, all these men, they get in the shower, they get out, they shake their head, and they go get dressed and they're off. And it is absolutely, the double standard is alive and well. One time as Secretary of State, I landed in Bulgaria, and I'd been like, just goggle-eyed all over the world. And we'd been late, and I had a meeting with the then Prime Minister, and so I had, I pulled my hair back in kind of a ponytail. And I get to the Prime Minister's office, and we're sitting across the table, as you do in these so-called bilats, and he is staring at me. And I'm starting to get a little self-conscious, like, do I have, like food in my teeth? I mean, what's happening? And I finally said, Mr. Prime Minister, is there something you want to say? And he goes, well, I was told if your hair was pulled back, you were in a bad mood. I said, no, I'm just an inept hair person. But it is, you have to laugh about it, because otherwise you'll cry, because it takes up so much time and energy, and you have to just live with the fact that, I remember I was in India one day and I got, something in my eye and I couldn't wear my contacts, so I put on my glasses. Front page stories, what did it mean that Hillary Clinton wore her glasses? It meant I got something in my eye. And you can't, again, take it seriously because it's so ridiculous most of the time, but you have to accept the fact that that's the double standard, and it's going to, affect you if you're a woman in politics.
Sadly, this is true. And I apologize for all the terrible pictures. I'll tell you one funny story, very short story in response. There was once some news story about the color of dress I wore, kind of analyzing what was the sophisticated message being sent. And my sister sent me an email saying, ha, Chrystia, they really don't know you. If they knew you, they would know the color of dress you wear depends entirely on what is the only thing in your closet that is clean. This is true. Our time has come to an end. I know. Well, we could ask the secretary to stay longer, but I think it would not be fair to her. This is her yeah. I really, just in conclusion, would like to thank you so much, Madam Secretary. I'd like to thank you for that, yeah. Okay, I want to say the things I'm thanking you for. So let's thank her for that incredibly important and timely warning about defending our democracy. Let's, if we remember one thing from what we heard today, let's remember that. And I do so much, very both personally for myself, but for every woman in this room and for every woman in Canada, want to thank you for, I was going to say tirelessly, I'm sure you got tired, but for just keeping on going, breaking that trail. The branches are hitting you. You're getting tired. You keep on going. You are such an example, such a role model to us. You have done so much.
Thank you so much.